Okay, let's start. Yeah, welcome to this stream, to the user group meeting today, on Tuesday. Today we have Pascal Berger here to tell us something about continuous code inspection using Cake. Yeah, pretty curious. We're currently sitting in the UAPS, in the meeting room, and try to stream this session out via Twitch. And hopefully it works. Yeah, we'll see. And yeah, we'll now hand over to Pascal. Yeah, feel free to introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Pascal. I work as a software architect at BPT Software in Switzerland, which does insurance software. I'm a Microsoft MVP in developer technologies and main questions or remarks, anytime just ask, write in the chat window on Twitch, and I will try to answer to them.
Yep.
So what I want to talk today is about continuous code inspection using Cake, which is an opinionated approach how to handle this issue. There are other tools, other ways to do this. I will show you one way to do it. And this will give you a short, quick introduction to Cake for the ones which don't know Cake yet, and then show how you can do it with Cake using a bunch of add-ins which extend Cake for this specific scenario. What we want to do, if we talk about continuous inspection, is imagine we have a build pipeline, a fairly simple one where we build our code and we run some tests, some pretty basic stuff. And what we want to do is introduce some kind of static code analysis in between. So we don't only want to compile our source code in binaries, test it and deploy it, but also make sure that our source code fits into certain guidelines, certain standards. And we want to have this into a build process. So one way you can do this is on your local machine. You can do this linting tools, Visual Studio code analysis. You can have them in Visual Studio integrated, which works fairly well. But what we want to do here is to integrate this into build system to enforce them actually, and not depend on developer actually running it. And what we then can do if we run this linter, we can break the build on certain conditions. So we can say we have certain rules we really want to enforce, and if they pop up during the build, then we break the build, and we can do this, for example, on a feature branch before a pull request gets merged. And with this, we can enforce our guidelines, being for style guidelines or security rules. So basically any rule which linter provides, and then we can enforce our guidelines and use this as a quality gate to bring code or merge code into a master branch. We can also do other stuff like creating reports of issues which occurred. For example, we say if certain issues will break the build, others are like on a warning level, are fairly okay, but we want to see them. So we maybe want to create the report from the linters which we have run, which might look something like this, where you see different rules which popped up on certain files, certain lines. You see the issues were there. And one thing which is also nice to do is to integrate into the development workflow which you have, which means if you work with Git, you probably work with pull requests, and there you want to have a feedback for fast feedback back to the developers. So you don't want to have developers pushing a branch, creating a pull request, needing to go to a build server, checking out some report to see what has happened. What would be much nicer is if build server can comment back into a pull request and say, okay, on this file, on this line, you have violated this rule, you need to change this. And this actually allows us to automate parts of our pull request workflow, so that you can say certain rules are automatically handled by a build surfer. And if you still do a human review, you just need to care of business issue and don't need to review stuff like are local variables named correctly. This is something which you fairly easily can do with an automated rule. You check them on the build surfer, you post them back on pull requests, and you can spend your resources on better ways than reviewing this kind of stuff. So this is can look like something like this, some standard .NET rules which pop up and are shown in the specific line. It's quite a lot in this small example. So the tool which I want to show today is Cake. And before I start with Cake itself, if you look at build processes, the easiest way to do builds is to just build on your local dev machine and then ship to customer, which works. But of course, it's quite risky. You have all the stuff, you have human errors which can occur. It can depend on specific environments. So if developer A does the build, it probably is not the same as if developer B does the build, because they have different environment. And you might also depend on specific versions. If you have only one person which does the build, if this person is sick or leaves the company or the project, you probably don't know how you do the build, because maybe it's documented, but probably not, and then you have issues. So this whole manual build stuff is quite risky, and so obvious thing to do is to automate this stuff. One way to do this is you can use a build surfer. So build surfer have a nice clickety-click UI where you can put your build pipeline fairly quickly together, which can be perfectly fine in certain situations, but in other situations this can lead to issues. So if you define your build pipeline on the build surfer, you create a dependency on the build surfer, which means if you afterwards at one point want to change your build surfer tool, you need to re-implement your build logic. Or if you want to use several build surfers, for example one for Linux stuff and for Windows stuff, you need to implement it twice. So you have all the vendor locking there. Also, as you have implemented the stuff on a build surfer, you cannot easily run this locally. And there are sometimes ways where you can create a local agent and run it, but it's not that easy as just run a script. And since it runs on the build surfer, it's hard to debug if you cannot run the same locally. There's also the issue with if you have a lot of repositories, probably if you have several hundred repositories, this is quite hard to scale. It depends on the tool you use. Some of them have templates which you can create your template, and then you can create build definitions out of it, and you create your 100 build definitions, but then you need to change something, and you need to change 100 build definitions. Other have template inheritance, which solve this issue, but still then you have still the issue. For example, if you want to have different build definitions for different branches, this doesn't work, so you need to couple this to the source code, for which some tools then have YAML files, but then you again have the issue with the YAML definition in all of these 100 repositories which you need to synchronize. So this can be quite troublesome depending on the tool to scale up, and with all this stuff it can be quite some headache to maintain if you go this route, depending how your situation is. And finally, often this includes that you use some kind of extensions. There's a whole lot of extensions out there. There are marketplaces which create pre-built tasks which you can just run into your build pipeline, and everything is done, except that this is a huge trust and security issue, which I'm sometimes surprised how easy people take this, but this is actually some third-party code which you allowed to run in your build pipeline, which has full access to everything. And I don't know if you know the the event source issue with npm, which was an attack on an npm package, which was exactly this. They attacked the build process of a company to introduce some code into the product, which when shipped then attacked the people which have a lot of bitcoins and gave it to them. So actually all these extensions are really easy. I mean, I've wrote some of them. People are using it. I can change to evil Pascal at some time, introduce some code. For example, Azure DevOps. I don't know if you do just a bug fix release, I think it just pushes through. And then my code runs in someone's environment, which can be not what you want. So you can, of course, review this stuff, but this is then not that easy as it seems in the first thing. It's not like just clickety-click and everything is good, so you need some additional work. Also, you can lose control. Like for example, if server updates or extension is updated and it just pushed to you, it changed actually your build pipeline, which is something which you probably don't want. So build works today, build doesn't work tomorrow. You have nothing changed, and if it just fails, this is not that bad. At least you see that it fails, but it just adds some nasty bug in it. It can be quite troublesome. So Cake can be a solution for this, which actually is we script our build. We don't depend on a build server. We use build server as a task runner, which just runs the Cake task, and we can have the Cake for local and server tool. So Cake is actually a build automation tool or a build orchestrator. It's not a replacement for MS Build. In Cake you still call MS Build if you want to compile some .NET solution. You can replace MS Build if you use MS Build also for build orchestration stuff, but basically it's an automation tool which orchestrates your whole build process and calls out to other tools, MS Build being one of them, for compiling .NET solutions. And it allows to write your build script in C#, which for me is a huge advantage. I wrote quite a lot of build scripts in MS Build, which can be quite hard to maintain if you have several hundred lines of code in declarative XML style and need to find out how the work is, the flow is through it, and what it actually does for me, especially as a C# developer. C# code is much easier to read and to maintain. Cake is powered by Rosin, which is the .NET compiler platform, and is open source project as part of .NET Foundation, which is a foundation which several open source projects also from Microsoft are part of. And you see here the website if you're interested. You can check it out with details. So with this, a reason to use Cake is basically it's C#, it uses Rosin compiler, so everything which you can do in .NET you can do in Cake. It's not a tool which has something similar to C#, it's actual C#, it's actual .NET, and you can use your normal .NET stuff and can do anything. So basically it's C# script, but you can use Nugget packages, you can use all the C# language features. It's not a limited subset of C# or .NET. Cake works cross-platform, means where it runs on Windows, it runs on Linux, it runs on Mac. There are some Docker images available which you can use for building. And it runs cross-framework, it runs on full framework, on Mono, and on .NET Core. And it's also cross-environment, has support for different build servers out of the box, and support for a lot of toolings out of the box, which you can call from your build script. And one of the biggest advantage for me for Cake is it's quite a healthy and big community. So if you have some issues while writing your build script, probably someone else already had, and you can chat out, and there's a Gitter channel, or can raise issues, and people probably which I've already experienced this, will help you out and show you ways how to deal with this. So Cakeworks basically has 2 files in a repository. So we have the actual build script, which is a build.cake file by convention. You can call it whatever you want, but this is the default name. This contains your actual build logic for your project in it. And beside that, we need a bootstrapper script, which is either PowerShell, a build.ps1, or a bash script on Linux, a build.shell script. And this bootstrapper script is responsible for installing the dependencies required for your build and the cake tool for running then your build.cake script. So you can rename this files, but these are the default names which you most often see. And in your build.cake script, cake is a dependency-based approach, so it's not something which Cake has invented. This exists since a very long time. Make already had this in the 70s. So what we are doing here is we defining tasks, and tasks can have dependencies on different tasks. So I will show you an example of a Cake script which has 4 tasks in it, which is a build task, which has a dependency on a clean task, which cleans the output directory. The build task compiles it, and has another dependency on a restore NuGet package task, which restores the package. And then we have a default task, which does itself nothing, but just has a dependency on build. So this is our default entry point into the script. In the script, this looks like this. So what we can do is we can parse arguments. Argument in this case is a cake alias, and these 2 lines is they look if argument with the name target was passed while executing the cake run. If not, it will use default as the target name. Otherwise, it will assign the name of the target which we want to execute into the target variable. The same for configuration variable. Then we can do some normal C# stuff where we assign some variables. We do some definitions where our paths are, and Cake provides some file system abstraction. So this works then nice if you are on Windows and on Linux. You can use the abstraction in Cake to work with different kind of file path notations. So these are make absolute this again a cake alias here or directory, combine with file path or methods on the specific cake abstraction for the file system. And then we can create a task with the task alias. In this case, we create a task clean, and thus says which is the action which we want to do in the task. Then we pass it a lambda, and in this case, we just call an alias called clean directory, and build here is the variable which contains the path which you want to clean, which actually just does remove everything inside this directory. We can do another task for restore NuGet package, which calls a NuGet restore alias, which is also shipped out of the box by Cake. NuGet is one of the tools which it has support out of the box. So there you have an alias, and we just pass it the path to the solution file, and then it restores all the NuGet package. Then we create the build task, and here we define our dependencies. So we say the build task is dependent on the clean task, and is also dependent on the restore NuGet package task, and also does call msbuild. Msbuild is the alias to call out to msbuild to build the solution. We pass the solution file, and we pass some settings to msbuild where we say which configuration which we want to build, which was one of the variables in the beginning, which we can use as a parameter to the script. And finally, we define the default task, which does nothing except define that we want to have a dependency on the build script. The last statement is run target, which says run my build script and run the target variable, which is by default. And if you just want to restore the Nugget package, then you call the script with the target restore Nugget packages, and it just runs this task and all dependencies, which this doesn't have. You can call build, and then it runs build. First clean, restore Nugget package, and then build. So, and if you execute this, it just goes through. It runs all these tasks. Here we have build, we have some other tasks in here, and in the end shows you a summary, which tasks it has executed, how long it took for every task, which task it has skipped. You can define criteria for certain tasks and say, okay, this task only execute, for example, if a certain variable is set, or if you're on a certain environment, maybe you want certain tasks only executed on build server but not locally. Certain tasks maybe only on Windows and not Linux, and you can do all this kind of stuff here. So with this basic introduction to Cake, Cake has quite strong support for extensibility. I will show two specific things. One is you can extend Cake with add-ins, and the other is you can share build script through Nugget packages. So if you have some kind of build script which you want to use in your 100 repositories, you can create a simple build script which just consumes another build script which is packaged as a Nugget package, and the build script in the repository is then fairly simple. Maybe just one line of code which is call the script which is in Nugget package, which allows you to share this and easily maintain this over a lot of repositories. So for the first thing, add-ins are you can use to extend the DSL of Cake. So all the different aliases we saw for cleaning directories, for restoring Nugget package, for calling out to MS-build, these are all aliases which Cake has out of the box. We can create additional add-ins which actually are normal C# or .NET libraries, which are distributed as Nugget packages, which can provide additional aliases to Cake. So if something is missing, Cake doesn't support a specific tool which you need in your build pipeline, you can create an add-in and call out to this tool, provide a nice DSL alias, and then use this inside of your build script. Of course, you can also do this directly with .NET stuff, with starting processes and everything, but add-ins and aliases are a nice way to wrap this stuff and get the complexity out of the build script into the alias and have a really clean build script which is just call MS-build or whatever tool you want. There are quite a lot of add-ins available for Cake. There are over 250 open source aliases available. They're listed, most of them, on the Cake website. On GitHub there's a specific organization, it's Cake minus contrib, where most of them are hosted. Also, if you want to write something, you get a lot of inspiration and ideas how to do it if you look at this add-in, since most of them are open source. So if you want to use an add-in, you can do this with the add-in preprocessor directive. This is how you call it. Nugget in this case is the package provider, which is the only package provider Cake has out of the box. You have the possibility to use different package providers, but for this you need to use modules, which is another extensibility method of Cake, which changes or hooks into internals of Cake. There are modules available for NPM or for Chocolatey, or you can create your own model for your specific packaging stuff which you can use later with this. But for our use case here, Nugget is what we want to use. So we say we want to use a Nugget package provider, and we want to have the package, in this name the package with the, in this case the package with the name cake.issues, and also in a specific version. And the specific version part here is quite important. This is something which you always want to do. You can also just say package equals cake.issue. This will work perfectly fine until the add-in author decides to release a new version of his add-in with breaking changes, and this will immediately break your build. So for getting deterministic builds, you should always pin to a specific version. You should do also the same with cake and with all add-ins, and so that you really say, okay, if I take this commit out of my repository, I know it builds with this version of cake and this version of the add-ins, and it works like this. And again, here you have the same issue with trust. So you have all these nice add-ins, they call out to tools or they do some stuff, but you should really check them before you add them into your build pipeline for your secret enterprise, banking, financial, risky stuff. So again, this is stuff which runs as full trusted in your build pipeline. Also, if you want to write add-ins, it's normal.NET libraries. So you create them, and you can define add-ins inside. There are basically just extension methods of a cake context. A cake context is the interface. So if you create an extension method of a cake context and additionally give it an attribute cake method alias, put this in a library, package this as a Nugget package, then you have created your first add-in. So we can just ask if you want to dig deeper. I will show you some add-ins. You can at any time dive into code if you want, and can show you more example of it. So going back to continuous code inspection, there's a bunch of add-ins available for Cake called Cake Issues, which you can use for doing this code inspection stuff inside of your build pipeline. So Cake Issues is issue management tooling for a Cake build system. It allows you to read issues from different linters or from log files created by different linters, and then create reports out of them or writing them as comments to pull requests or into build systems. So it's basically an abstraction layer about different linters, different pull request systems, and different reporting outputs. It's not just one add-in, it's over 10 add-ins, and it provides you a bunch of aliases for different purposes. So it's abstracted in and split into multiple aliases, so you can put together whatever your tooling is and don't get a lot of overhead for other tools which you don't actually use. And there exist some add-ins. You can extend it through additional add-ins. There are also interfaces available which you can implement, and extension points. And the add-ins are open source and documented on the website, which you see here. So how it looks like. It's in the core there are 3 add-ins. There's a cake.issues add-in, which is responsible for reading issues from log files. So it contains the logic to read from a log file, and it provides you aliases for reading. So you have a read issue alias defined there. There's a cake issues reporting add-in, which is responsible for creating reports from the issues which we have read from a log file. So it provides you aliases for create report, I think it's named. And there's a cake issues pull requests add-in, which provides aliases and the logic for writing issues to as comments into pull requests or into build systems. So only this add-ins alone doesn't give you anything. So it gives you some aliases, but you cannot use them. You need to specify which tools you actually want to use them with. So for reading issues, there's basically for every tool or for every linter, there are specific add-ins. So there's a cake issues MS build, which is capable of parsing log file created by MS build in different formats, being by MS build extension, logger, which creates XML, or if you create a bin log file, and you can throw it at this and then read the issues. The same is inspect code, which is the resharper engine, ESLint, markdown lint. A quite specific one, which I used once for my purposes, is DocFX, which is not a linting tool, but basically you can use this approach for anything which raises warnings, which you can point to a specific line in the file. So DocFX throws, for example, warnings. If you have an invalid link in it, it's not nice warnings which it throws, but it throws them, and it says on line 23 you have an invalid link in your markdown file. So we can also parse this output from DocFX and say, okay, we handle this like a linting issue on this line. On the other side, we have the same with different reporting implementations. There's currently only one, which creates websites. And there's pull request or build server implementation. There's currently implementation for Azure DevOps or Team Foundation Server, and for AppWire as a build system. And for all these linters or report formats or pull request system, you can create your own add-ins and hook them into. So if you have a specific tool or a specific in-house tool, you can create the add-in. It's not that much code you need to write, because most of the infrastructure code is in the core parts, the green add-ins, which provide them to you. And then in the, for example, on the left side, it's basically just parse the file. You have only the logic to parse the file and give it back, which you need to do. So some more examples. For reading issues, as shown before, we have the thing on the left side, which are called issue providers. They're responsible for reading or parsing the file and providing the issues to the core alias behind it. And they're completely separated, so the core has no idea about the specific tools which it can handle. So supporting another tool is just another add-in, and then pass the issues back. And there are also infrastructure for supporting, for example, multiple formats. Like I told before, for MS Build, we support some XML format. We also support binlog, or for ESLint, there's some JSON format or different format. So there's infrastructure code there available which all handles this, which provides some interfaces which you can implement inside your specific issue provider add-in. So we already saw what's available, and there's a whole bunch of stuff which can be done here. So some idea, you can basically use all web linters, StyleLint, TSLint, WebHint, whatever exists. They basically all create some kind of file which you can parse, as long as it's an issue about the file and you have a file name and a line, then you can use it. You can, for example, also lint Docker files. There's tools for this, or you can hook into a tool which reports security vulnerabilities. There are tools, for example, which checks your Nugget packages, so you can run this, and if it reports something, you know on which line in your CS profile or package config, if you still have package config, the specific Nugget package is used, and then you can report this package on this line has security issue something. Or or you can do whatever you want in your build script. Basically, you can in your build script add some logic and say, okay, if this condition occurs, I create a new issue. And you could, for example, do some basic architectural layer checks. So where you see, does my assembly A reference assembly B and is not allowed to, so create an issue for it in your build script and pass it to the core logic. So if you want to use this, you need to add the cake issues add-in, and be warned here, I don't pin the specific version, which you always should, but for sake of simplicity and the version number change, I didn't do it here. And cake issues is the core add-in, which you always need, and then you need to define which specific log value or tooling you want to integrate. So in this case, we want to use inspect code or resharper as an engine, so we add the cake issues inspect code add-in into the build. Then we create the task. Here it's called read issues, and define some setting. Read issues settings is an object or is defined by cake issues, which says, okay, these are the settings which I need for reading issues. You need to give it the root path of your repository and the format in which you want to have the issues formatted. In this case, we say we want to have them formatted as Markdown. This, I think, at the moment doesn't make any difference because no issue provider supports different formats. But the idea here is that issue provider maybe are capable of creating the issue description in plain text or in Markdown formatting or in HTML, and we can now say here, give me this format or fall back to plain text. And then finally, we read the issues, which is basically just the read issues alias, and we have another alias. So read issues is defined in the cake issues add-in as alias, and inspect code issues from file path is an alias provided by the cake issues inspect code add-in for reading inspect code files. We pass it the path to the inspect code log file and the settings object.
So you're using two add-ins in this line, right?
Yeah, so read issues comes from cake issues, and inspect code issues from file path comes from cake issues inspect code.
When is this log file created? Some tasks before?
Yeah, some task before.
Okay.
There's no dependency, so probably it would make sense to have here dependency on your build task.
Yeah.
So inspect code log is just the log file created by inspect code. And this returns us an enumerable of iIssue. iIssue is the interface defined by cake issues, and then we can, information is an alias provided by cake, which just outputs something, and on the information level we say how many issues are found. This is basically the parsing logic. And what we get back is an enumerable of iIssue, and iIssue is the abstraction layer of the issues. So what cake issues actually does is it abstracts all the different kind of linters into a specific interface, which is iIssue. And this is in the responsibility of the issue provider that it parses the log files and define how to create an iIssue object out of it. And afterwards, the core itself only knows iIssue. The report generator only knows iIssue, and the pull request and build system integration only knows iIssue. So the issue provider parses, creates an iIssue, and then from there on it's just iIssues. And an iIssue knows a project if it's provided by the issue provider. So there can be a project path. For example, if you have a .NET solution, this and use the MS build parser, this will be the path to the CSPROI file. or the project name, which is not the full path in this case, but only the name. This really depends on the issue provider, how they implement it, how he defines what is a project for this specific tool. You get the file path, which is the file which is affected by this issue. Both paths are relative to the repository root, therefore we needed to pass the repository root in the step before. You get the line, on the line which the issue occurred, or if it's not specific to a line, only to a file, then it's null. We get the message in the format which we provided or asked for, so this will be the markdown if provided by the issue provider, is capable of creating markdown messages and we ask for them. There's a priority which is a number and a priority name which is the string, so it also depends on the issue provider and later on the use case what you want to do with it. And there can be a rule which is the name, for example, for all this CS something for MS Build, code analysis stuff, and the rule URL is something which the issue provider can create as a URL to get documentation about the specific rule. So we have the information, it's this rule number, and here's a link which provides documentation about it. And finally, there's the provider type and name. This is the issue provider, which from where this issue came from as a type name and a human-friendly name. So if we go further with examples, we probably will build up some different tasks, and we have one task to read issues, and then we have another task to do something with these issues, and we want to pass the issues which we have read in the first task into the second one, which you can do either by defining some global variable, some static class with some properties, or since a few versions in Cake, there's typed contexts, which are a nicer way to handle this scenario. For typed contexts, you basically need to create a class. In this case, we have a class buildData, which has an property issues and a method addIssues to add issues to it, and the issues property is read-only. So nothing fancy, class, you can add issues, you can get access to the issues which are stored in this class. To use this, to set up the typed context, we need setup is the setup task of Cake, and there's a generic version of it where you can pass the type of our typed context. So instead of just call setup, we can call setup of buildData, and then we need to return an instance of our typed context class. So we create a new instance of buildData, which means the Cakes now has an instance of this class setup, which we can use further. Then what we need to do, if we want to store issues in typed context, we need to change our read issues task from before and say that in the does statement we say it's now does of buildData, and the lambda is passed a data instance, which is the instance of our typed context. And with this, in the end of the parsing code is the same as we had before. We can just call the addIssues method on our buildData class and add the issues which we just have parsed to the typed context. So another example which you can do now is if you want to break builds with this, we can, oh, there's a typo here. We can create a task which shouldn't be called create report, but maybe break build, which is dependent on read issues and also gets passed in this typed context data, which now contains all the data because it has dependency on read issues. So as soon as we call this task, read issues will be run first. It will parse the issues, it will fill them into type context, and type context will be passed here as data. So what we can do here is, for example, we have data the issues property, which gives us access to all the issues which we have in the type context. We say, okay, we now want to have all issues where priority is equals error. So maybe we have different issues now in our type context. Some are errors, some are warnings, some are suggestions, and we want to just filter out them. This is normal link statement. And then we can say if errors contains anything, we throw an exception and say we found this number of errors while analyzing the solution. Throw an exception in a cake script will fail the cake script. There's also an error alias which you can use to print out an error. Depending on your needs, maybe you just will to print out the error, continue with a build script and fail the build script later. If you want to fail fast, you just throw. Okay, so now we have the possibility to parse issues and have them in an enumerable of issue. We know the number, we can break builds. Next thing which we might want to do is create reports. For this we have reports format, and there's one report format currently available, which is an add-in which uses Erasure internally. So it contains some Erasure templates out of the box, and you throw an enumerable of issues at it. It uses Erasure to render a website and returns you the website. It also has support for custom templates, so you can create your own Erasure template and say, I will have this enumerable of issue, this template, create the report for me. To do this, you need to add some more add-ins into it. One is Cake Issues Reporting, which is the core add-in which provides you with the alias and the logic for creating reports, and the other is the specific report format. In this case, it's Cake Issues Reporting Generic. Then you create another task called Create Report. It's dependent on read issues and also gets the typed context. So here the generic issue report has some format settings. There's an alias which you can use to create an instance of the settings object, and then there's a fluent syntax where you can say, okay, create a settings object from an embedded template, which is an enum. In this case, it is HTML, the XData grid, which is the DevExpress, the experience-based data grid. There's currently 3 layouts in it. This is the most advanced. The easiest one is just the HTML table without any styling. So you can choose here one of these embedded templates. Then you can pass options for this specific one. So you can say, I want to render the data grid in the theme with a Google Material Blue design. And finally, we need to call create issue report. This is again the alias which came from the Cake issues reporting, the core alias. Pass it the issues which you have in the typed context, and say we use the generic issue report format with the settings which you have above, repo root folder from somewhere, and then say where it should create the report. So for example, here there's an Azure DevOps project, an Azure DevOps pipeline build, which was run. And what this did, it used a custom Erasure template, which creates a summary report, which then is uploaded to Azure DevOps and shows all the issues here. And it also adds a file which contains the whole, it's a download, which contains the whole more fancy DevExpress report, which will look like this. So this is just this one page HTML file. So it basically uses the JavaScript from DevExpress, and it initializes it with a huge JSON array with all your issues in it. Surprisingly, this even works to 10,000 of issues. Very well. So here you can use all of what the DevEx stuff you provide. So you can group by projects, and then you get all the stuff. This is not something which Cake or Cake issues. This is something which this specific JavaScript library does, which you can use in the Erasure template. So next thing is integration in pull request. So we have this pull request or build system add-ins which create communication with a specific pull request system, being it Azure DevOps, or with a build system. There's an implementation for AppWare available, and the core implementation, so Cake issues pull request, contains some logic to find out which issues it needs to comment. So there's some filter mechanism in here. For example, you have a legacy project which has 5,000 of issues. You change only one file. You probably don't want everything posted in there. So it filters everything out which is not part of your specific pull request, if the pull request systems supported. So with TFS, we have also some integration that you have state on the pull request comments, so they can be active or closed or resolved. So it creates the comments there. If you fix the code in a subsequent commit and rerun it, it will check and see, okay, I've commented this issue in the last run. This issue is no longer existing in the current run, so we'll resolve this comment. Or otherwise, if you resolve it and it still exists, it will reopen it. There are also some hooks where you can hook here into it and add additional filters for your logic. For example, you have, if you know, for example, the issues from last build, you can use this. This is something which I once did. It's like determine the last successful build run on the target branch of a pull request, get its log files from MS Build, parse it, then I know which issues existed for the last run. I do the same for the current run on my feature branch. I diff them and only post the diffs and not what already existed. So here again, if you want to use this, you need two add-ins. There's the Cake issues pull request, the core add-in, and the Cake issues pull request AppWare in this example. So we make an integration into AppWare as a build system. We create the task, report issues to pull request, which actually reports issue to build system. Again, it's dependent on read issues. Here you see an example with criteria. We can define that this task should only run if the build is running on AppWare, since there's probably doesn't make much sense to run this task and report issues to AppWare if you run it locally. We create some settings which are fairly easy in this case, and report issues to pull request is the alias which is given by Cake issues pull request. We say the enumerable of our issues we want to pass, and say we pass it to AppWare with these settings, and again the repo root folder. The same, or maybe first we can show you an example how this looks like. So here you see there's an AppWire build, and most people probably know the console, which is what you see, but there's a message tab here.
Mm-hmm.
So AppWire has the possibility that you can send it message during your build. This is what we are doing. And it sends for every issue, it finds a message with the name of the project, the file, the line, and the details here. So this is something which doesn't scale to 10,000 of issues, since every issue is a separate request to AppWire and takes some time. Another thing which you can do, which for example is Azure DevOps has some pull request state. So you can define state on pull requests, and this we can do with another add-in for Cake. It's Cake TFS, which is integration for Azure DevOps, or the invitation server. And here we create another task, and then we have some logic. We can say if we have any issues, we say state is error, and the description is that many issues are found. Otherwise, we say state is succeeded and no issues are found. So just normal variables yet. Then we create the pull request status object. This is something which comes from the Cake TFS add-in, which is the wrap around the Azure DevOps API. So we create a new status with the name issues. Status needs to have a genre, which is my build script. In this case, we set the state and description, which we determined before. We create some settings so we can access Azure DevOps. In this case, it's on-premise TFS instance, specific branch, through NTLM authentication. We could use whatever authentication we have. And then finally set the status with the settings. So this looks like this. This is a pull request in Azure DevOps. And this are the stuff which was reported as comments. So that we have an issue, unused member global, which is a ReSharper issue which says we don't use foo. This is the link which was provided. I don't know if it still works. To the issue description. This is part which the issue provided us by parsing the inspect code log file. Gives all this metadata, and the Cake issue pull request TFS then posts this here as comment. And the other thing which we see here is the status, which is here, where we say, okay, now we have 28 issues, therefore status is an error. And with Azure DevOps, for example, you have the possibility to define policies on status. So we can do stuff like, currently it's just a status, it doesn't affect the pull request at all, but you can define a policy where you say, okay, the pull request can only be merged if this specific status is successful. And you can set the status on any condition which is suitable for you. For example, if there are any issues which are error, then I set this state, and then set a policy on it, and then I enforce that pull requests cannot be merged as long as something happens. Another thing which you can do with AppWire, there's currently no integration with GitHub. It would be fairly simple to do a GitHub integration. The issue with GitHub or with a public GitHub repository is a trusting issue. So since GitHub is one system and you use, for example, AppWire for building as another system, your build needs to have access to GitHub to write the comments. Therefore, it needs some kind of token. And as soon as you have a public GitHub project, this means someone can fork this, can create a topic branch, do some evil stuff with your build script, which is like give me your secret token which runs in this build script and send it to my email address, and then runs this. So whatever you do, it's fairly simple to get the token to access your system. With Azure DevOps, this is not that big of an issue because it's the same system which contains the pull request system and the build system, and you have the possibility to create an on-demand OAuth token for the build, which is valid as long as the build is running, and afterwards discard it. So it works very well there. What you can do, but for example, this is something AppWire specific, is you can write the message which you have here in posted to AppWire back to GitHub. This is something which AppWire can do. So in your AppWire configuration file, you can add some lines, and then it will just post all the messages back. Or if you are in a trusted GitHub enterprise environment, this probably also won't be that big of an issue as long as you trust your developers.
Never trusted them.
So that's basically it for cake issues. Now there's one more thing which exists, which is a recipe script to make all this easier. So what we saw now is you need to add different add-ins, you need to do all the integration, you need to say, I want to parse this, and then I pass it to this, and I need to go to Azure DevOps, and then to create the report and set the status and all this. So this is really an opinionated approach how you can do this, but if it fits your use case, it makes it much more simpler. So this is basically a script, which is another way how you can extend or cake. It's just a normal cake script provided as a nugget script, which does all this stuff. And you need just a few lines of code to hook this into your project-specific script to do all the stuff which we have so now. Currently, it supports MS Build and Inspect code log files, can be extended to all others, and it supports Azure Pipelines and Azure Repos. With this, it looks like this is no longer, you don't need to add any add-ins. This is something which the cake issues receipt script does for you, but you say, I want to load this cake issues receipt from Nugget, which is a package, and use the load directive, which means load the script, the cake script, which is inside of this Nugget package. This is the same approach which you can use if you have your 100 repositories and you want to share a common build script across them. Just this single line is probably, or you need a second line for maybe to execute it, but these two lines are all you need in your repository stuff, and everything else you can put into a Nugget repo. So here we create a task, configure cake issues receipt. It's dependent on a build and run inspect code task, which exists in our build script. So build builds and creates a MS build log file, run inspect code, runs inspect code resharper, and creates the log file there. And then we just pass the paths of our log files, which we have stored in some variable, or can pass with a typed context or whatever, to cake issues receipt. So this issue parameters .input files .msbuild XML file log file path is a property which is provided by cake issues receipt, and there it accepts msbuild log file path in the XML format. So we say we have here this path for you, here this path for you for inspect code. And then we need to hook into the pipeline. So we say our configure cake issues receipt task is dependent on the read issues task of cake issues receipt. So cake issues receipt internally contains some tasks which it provides, but of course it has no clue what task exists outside. So we need to hook somewhere into it, and we suddenly defined our own task. And now we say this task hooks into the read issues task of the receive script. Read issues task is a normal property, which is the instance of the task. So if you have, for example, here this task definition, what you can do, you can assign this task to a variable. You can say var my task equals task. And this gives you the instance of the task, which you can reuse later. So what we are doing here is we have all these tasks in the receive script, and we store these instances here in this issue build task static class, and read issues task is the instance of the read issues task inside of the receive script, and is dependent on is just the normal dependency definition for tasks, which we can call outside of the receive script to hook into. And finally, we define a task default, which says default is dependent on issues, which is another task in the receive script, which stores everything inside the receive script. So what this does is it stores the issues task in the receive script, which at some point calls a read issues task, which is now dependent on the configure cake issues receive task, which is this one, which is dependent on build and run inspect code task. So in the end, we will first build, then run inspect code, then run this configure task and pass the parameters or the paths to our log files into cake receive, and then read issues is called, which reads all the stuff and creates a report and report to writes a comment to the pull request, and then it's finally done. So it basically looks does exactly the same thing. So it writes a status. It has a summary report. It has the issue here. So here's the status. Here it writes the stuff in it. And the difference is this is the whole build script for doing this. Let's make it bigger. And most of this build script is just my actual building of the project. So I load my receipt, in this case not from Nugget but from Myget, which is the integration feed developing the script. Build data is an external cake script where I define my typed context class, which is shown previously, just to have clean files are separated into two files, and you can do this whenever you want with cake. Just say load the other file. We use some tools. This is something which you didn't see. So I say I want to use inspect code. So this is part of the Visual command line tools. So this is a Nugget package, but it's not a cake add-in, but it's a tool. So it's an executable in it. So I use the tool preprocessor directive because it doesn't make sense to load it. And MS-Build extension pack is another one which can which provides a logger for MS-Build to create log files in an XML format. Creates a target, setups the type context, does the actual build. So defines where the solution file is, restores Nugget packages, defines the MS-Build target, so it's rebuild in this case, set up the specific logger which you want to use, which comes from an extension pack loggers, and this is one of the loggers where the cake issues MS-Build add-in has support for. Beside a bin log, we could also do a bin log here. But by the way, bin logs are also a security trap because bin logs contain all your environment variables. So if you have a build server where you have some tokens in environment variables and pass them to the build script, and because they're nice and safe there, and you create bin logs, they contain everything. So you probably don't want to share them. So we make sure the directory exists for the output. We call out to MS-build. And finally, we here directly pass the path of the MS-build script to cake issues receive. This is what we, in the example previously, did in a separate task. Same for inspect code. We define the settings where you should write to, call inspect code, gain our solution, and pass it to cake issue receive. Then we create a task lint, which depends on inspect code, and say the read issues task in cake issue receive is dependent on the build task, so we need to build, and is dependent on the lint task, which runs inspect code, and make sure that the issues task is run. So basically this is mostly the building and running inspect code, and everything else is handled and gives you the report, pull request status, and whatever you want. So I think that's what we want to show is, are there any questions? Something which you want to dig deeper into? I can show you code, how the add-ins look like, how they are built.
No, it's okay. You've shown a bit. I would add only one thing. I think I missed it on the advantage. I think the big advantage of Cake is that the script is versioned with the source code,
Mm-hmm.
with your source code. I mean, we had several issues in the past where we were using TeamCity as a build system, and when you had to make a patch which goes really a long time ago, your build script that is hosted by TeamCity was not aligned anymore, and then it was not built. So that's a really big advantage, I think, of using Cake or other tool like that.
Yeah, definitely. The important part there is that you pin everything. If you don't pin your Cake version or some add-in version, it doesn't help you if your build script is in version control. If you run it 1 year later, you get the latest.
Yeah, this is also important for sure.
Do you know a fast way how to get the current versions of the packages you are using in a build script by this? Or something you can use to put it into the Cake script itself?
Of the add-ins?
Yes.
Not yet. I know there. It depends on what. For example, if you use GitHub, I know there's an issue with DependerBot, which is a dependency management tool for different kinds of dependencies like Nugget and NPM and Docker images. And there's an issue, and they showed some interest to implement this for Cake. So this could be something. Then you have a bot which just creates your pull requests whenever some add-in is newer. Otherwise, don't be aware of anything which exists out of the box.
Are you using GitHub for your code?
No.
Okay. Because GitHub provides you something like that that will tell you when you have in your solution NuGet that has a security issue. It will report you that. I can show you. Sure.
Yeah, you mean for Cake add-ins or for general packages?
Mainly for Cake packages.
Oh,
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, there are several tools for Nugget or all other package management stuff. I don't know anything for Cake at the moment.
I don't mean for security problems, but for you said you should fix the version in your Cake script header. So maybe you have a script but have not yet fixed the versions, but now you want to fix the versions. What's the best way to find out what's the current version is, or
NuGet or
what version you should
Uh-huh.
use? So there are
This is easy. Just run it, and then see what version it has taken. So as soon as you run it under the tools folder, you have an add-ins, and then you see here. If you, I don't know if you can see it, but you see it has chosen cake issues 062, cake issues inspector 061. This, or if you don't pin, these are the latest at the moment where you have run it. You can take these versions.
Or you can go to nuget.org with the name of the nuget and see the version that are listed. This is the way we update.
Yeah. So for initial, this works very well. If you don't have pinned and want to pin, here you see what the versions are. Subsequently, yeah, you need to check one by one. I don't know any tool which does this at the moment.
Do you know if there is any linter that will tell you, hey, you're using this version of this nugget, but there is a new version, so that you can. That's a great idea.
No, not it. There's I think there's an issue with Cake. There was some discussion about implementing this kind of stuff into Cake. There's pros and cons about this. Like, do you really want to have Cake do some calls to the internet for checking if your add-ins are up to date, and this has some performance impact? Doesn't run in but maybe this can be some opt-in feature in the future. Or some separate tool which does this kind of stuff. We have some warnings in Cake if you don't ping. It will show you that you should, but not if you have an outdated version. Except add-ins actually are built against a specific version of Cake. So if you create an add-in, you have a reference to Cake in it. And this is against which Cake API you are built. And from time to time, not that often, but it happens that the Cake add-in breaks. And Cake knows which versions are compatible and which are breaking and warns you. So, for example, I think current version is 0.31 something, but hasn't changed any API stuff back to 0.28. So if I have an add-in which is built against 0.28, it still works with 0.31. If I have an add-in which was built against 0.20, it won't work. And then Cake will output a warning and say, or an error depending on its configuration, and say, oh no, this add-in was built against a later version of Cake where we know we have breaking changes. Please update your add-in and build it against the newer version of Cake, which has at least a compatible API. So this check is done, and you can override it, but not if a newer version exists. Any other questions?
Seems not. We don't have any questions from the chat currently, unfortunately. Then in that case, many thanks.
So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks a lot.
I learned a lot of new stuff.